Hi, I'm bigcal and welcome to my world. Today is another tier list, and this tier list will be looking at video game controllers. Yeah, so a little bit different than normal this time. I've got my face in the video. Yay! So hopefully I'll be able to sync it up properly and it'll be all okay. And hopefully I can find a decent place on the screen for this so it doesn't block the tier list. Who knows, we'll find out soon enough. Anyway, so video game controllers, I'm only listing the ones that I actually have and use and have used or whatever. So, you'll notice that something like the Sega Master System controller isn't here because I don't own a Sega Master System and I haven't played a Sega Master System since I was a kid at a friend's house. So, not going to be there. Anyway, let's just get right into it with the classic, the first video game controller I would have ever used, the classic NES controller. D-pad, start, select, A and B. So simple, and pretty much every controller ever since has been modelled on this. So it's going to have an S tier ranking. Despite the fact that it's, a rectangle cuboid, because I guess it's 3D. Yeah, you'd think it'd have the sharp edges, be a bit uncomfortable, but honestly, all the years I've been playing the NES, never found it uncomfortable. So it's still a fantastic controller. Oh, phone's beeping at me. And speaking of fantastic controllers, the Super Nintendo one. Yes, of course that's an S ranking. It has to be, basically. The Super Nintendo controller expands on what the NES controller had. We've still got the D-pad, we've got A and B buttons still, but now they're slanted or whatever, so it's much more comfortable for holding, running, jumping things. We also get the Y and the X button for added control over games. Still got start and select, and then you have the two shoulder pads, which are very important and just fantastic additions to the controller. It's also rounded now, so it is more comfortable, even though, like I said, the NES controller, I never found it uncomfortable for long periods of time, even though with the shape of it. But yeah, the Super Nintendo controller is much more comfortable. Oh boy, now we have the N64 controller, the three-prong. How do you use it? Do you need three hands? No, you morons. Jesus Christ, see, anyone who thinks that is just completely and utterly stupid, to be honest. It is easy to hold, it is very comfortable, it is a good controller. It's not the best controller, but it's still pretty good. And true, I do own a Brawler 64, I own two of them, which are a more modern controller design for the N64, which I do prefer, yes, but there's still nothing technically wrong with the N64 controller. Once you figure out after 2 seconds where you have to put your hands, it's easy. We've got the analog stick, which was huge at the time, of course. It doesn't hold up as well these days. The analog stick's not as good, obviously, as more modern ones. We've got the Z button at the back for the trigger, which is excellent. I love that. Still got your shoulder buttons, of course. You got your A and B start, but instead now you have the C buttons, which a lot of games used for the camera, which was really cool. Of course, now we have dual analog sticks for things like that, but at the time that was really cool to use that, or if it didn't use the camera, they were extra buttons. So it's still a good controller in my opinion, but yeah, it isn't that great. Like I said, the analog stick doesn't hold up as well. And while I have no issues using the controller and holding it and finding where to put my hands, I do prefer the Brawler 64 these days when I play the N64. GameCube controller. So this took, obviously, what the N64 controller had, and instead of C buttons we now get the C stick, which is fantastic. It has one of the best analog sticks ever made on any controller. You've got A, B, X and Y are back. The button configuration, each button's different. You've got the A button is massive, the B button's smaller, and then X and Y, well, the same shape but in different positions, obviously, and it's really, really comfortable. Triggers are fine, you're not the best, and you have the Z button that's just in front of the right trigger. The D-pad, not the best on it, but everything else is just fantastic, and it really is one of my all-time favourite controllers. It is amazing. So the Wii controller, the Wiimote and Nunchuck combination. Obviously this was designed for motion control, and it's okay at that for the most part. Depends on the game, who programmed it, how they programmed it, if they're using Motion Plus. But it does work generally. It's only really the really shitty third-party games, for the most part, where it's just terrible because they're completely incompetent developers and haven't got a clue what they're doing. Obviously some big titles were pretty poor with it. Remember Red Steel? Red Steel 2, much improved, but Red Steel 1 was, yeah, not very good. Obviously you don't have to use motion control in a lot of games as well, so is it comfortable? For me, yes. You've got a very good analog stick again. The trigger buttons very comfortable. You've got the Z trigger now is on the back of the Wiimote, and then is it the Z trigger? And then you've got, so it's a trigger anyway. Then you've got two other buttons on the Nunchuck for your left hand, and D-pad is really nice. A button, plus, minus instead of start and select, 1 and 2. I really find this to be a comfortable controller when it's not being used for motion controls. When it is getting used for motion controls, again, it's 50-50 depending on the game. But I probably like this controller a lot more than most people. I don't really have much issues with it. Obviously motion control tends to put a lot of people off, but in terms of comfortable controller, it feels really good in your hand. The buttons are all really great, really responsive, great analog stick, the triggers are really nice, the D-pad is good. Yeah, it is an excellent controller. It's just got a very weird design, kind of like the N64 one. And yeah, again, it depends on the game that you're playing as to how well it's going to be sometimes. But that's just what you get with motion control. Right, let's move on to the Wii U's gamepad. The predecessor to the Switch. We have the gamepad, we can play away from the TV. Not too far though, depending on where the base unit for the Wii U is set up. It's got a touchscreen. It is a bit bulky, especially compared to the Switch these days, but when it first came out I thought it was great. Despite the size of it, it's very comfortable. The analog stick's very good, the D-pad decent, the buttons fine, the triggers great, the touchscreen usually very responsive, and one of the things it does have over the Switch is that you can use the gamepad while playing it on the TV still. So for example, Mario Maker 2, if you want to make a level, you either have the gamepad out and you're using the touchscreen, or you've got it docked and you're using the controllers. With the Wii U version, with the original Mario Maker, you could use the gamepad to create all of your levels with the touchscreen and see it on screen at the same time, and immediately when you want to play you can just look up at the screen, and it was much better. So I like that a bit more than the Switch for that reason. Yeah, so it's a very comfortable controller despite the size. It's got lots of cool features, of course. It's got some motion control in it, I think. Does it? Yeah, because it's also got the camera for things like Lego City Undercover and Zombie U, where you can move it around. It's like augmented reality or whatever, and that was really cool. Very much enjoyed that aspect of it. You also had similar to sort of like the DS, where you could blow into it. I only know of like 2 games that ever made use of that. There's probably a couple more out there, but I haven't played them. Obviously you have the touchscreen aspect, which is really cool, and you had the ability to use it and have a second screen while using it on the TV. So yeah, that was really cool. I think it's an underrated controller. Just because the entire system's pretty underrated, just because it didn't sell that well, because people were confused by what the hell it was. So we move on now to the most modern of controllers for Nintendo, the Nintendo Switch and the Joy-Cons. And yeah, I'm going to have to put these in the same really B. nice analog sticks, buttons, nice, but there's no D-pad. Which, yeah, what are you doing, Nintendo? Give us a fucking D-pad. The Switch Lite, the light switch, is getting a D-pad, but obviously that's because the Joy-Cons don't remove, so you don't turn them sideways and things and share them and give them to other people or whatever, so yeah, give us a D-pad version, please. If you're doing a Switch Pro, give us one with a bloody D-pad. Triggers, I've heard people complaining about those. Never had an issue with them. Motion control wise, I haven't really used it that much in games. Most of the time I just have it set up. Where is it? Just hold on a second. Yeah, most of the time I just have the controller set up in this that comes with the system. You just slot them in and then it's more like a normal control pad. And that's fine. Or of course I just have them attached to the screen and then it's kind of like a slim Wii U. So the good controller, very responsive, does mostly what you need it to do, but the lack of the D-pad does bring it down a bit. Yeah. What are you doing, Nintendo? So moving on now to PlayStation, and we have the original PS1 controller. Came with the system back in the day. No analog sticks. Dun dun dun. And it's alright. It hasn't really aged well, to be honest. When you're holding it and you're using it, you just wish you had analog sticks now. Even when you're playing games that were released before the analog stick were out, if it supported it still, you could press the little button, you'd still be able to use the analog stick to move around. Games, for the most part, feel much better to use that way. There are a couple, obviously, with the D-pad feels better, but yeah, it's definitely, you know, the lack of the analog stick brings it down for me these days. But aside from that, it's still pretty comfortable. You know, it's kind of got a SNES controller vibe with just longer controllers, kind of like the N64 and the GameCube. It's kind of like a mix between those, really, and it's still a nice controller, but yeah, the lack of the D-pad, the analog sticks bring it down these days. Which brings us then to the DualShock 1 controller. Gonna put that in B as well. Took what was great about the regular, obviously, PlayStation controller and gave us dual analog sticks. So now we had one for moving around, one for camera, potentially, depending on how the game developers programmed it. And that has been the main design, really, for PlayStation controllers ever since. Move on, you know, the DualShock 2. And it's essentially the same. I think the triggers are a little bit better. Obviously, it's a bit more responsive with the, you know, because games better now on the PS2. Developers are using it better. Getting used to the analog sticks having two and what they can use them for. Yeah, so very good controller, but basically the same. You know, you got rumble, whatever. It's nice. PlayStation 3's DualShock 3. Again, yeah, it's just the same, except the triggers nowhere near as good. Especially the other two triggers at the back, just not very good. And my original PS3 controller, the triggers broke. You know, they're knackered up. They would just randomly press at times. I tried to fix it, couldn't get it done. But yeah, it's a nice controller. I liked the button in the middle. You know, kind of like the home button on the Wii and the Wii U, and you know, the Switch now, where you could, you know, go into the PlayStation menu and things like that. That was a nice addition to it. But yeah, it's mostly the same, except, yeah, like I said, the triggers bring it down, but I do like the addition of the home button. And then we get the PS4 controller, which finally, you know, took a bit of a design, what do you call it? It changed up its design a little bit, and I'm really surprised by it. When I first saw the controller, I thought, that doesn't really look that comfortable. You know, you got that weird touch screen pad thing in the middle. Not really sure about it. Then I played with it, and it was great. Again, you know, you still got the basic design of what the PlayStation controller's always been. You got your triggers, you got your D-pad, your dual analog sticks, your face buttons, a PlayStation button, and they all feel much better this time around. Everything just feels like it's improved on the controller. The triggers especially are far better than the PS3 version. The little pad in the middle is not really utilised in most games, so yeah, it's just kind of there for the most part, but it is nice to have if a game does use it. But overall, I think the controller's just been improved over its predecessors completely. The other ones just all feel kind of the same, and then like I said, the PS3 ruined the triggers a bit, and this brought them back to being really good. Xbox controllers now, and we have the original Xbox Duke controller, the big bugger. I love this controller. Screw the haters. I'm not big, despite my name bigcal. I'm only like 5'4". My hands, normal size for me. They're not very big hands. And yet I love the Duke controller. I heard a lot of people complain, oh, it's too big, it hurts my hands to play with. What the fuck, you're like 6'4" with hands bigger than my head. What is wrong with you people? I always found it really comfortable. I always liked the triggers, for Halo especially, it was really cool. The dual analog sticks, the different placement, it's kind of more like the GameCube controller. Always liked that. The D-pad, not really used much from what I remember in most of the games. You got your face buttons, just generally fine. You also have the black and white buttons, which just 2 extra buttons, whatever. Never had an issue with the placement or anything. Yeah, so I always just really liked this controller. It's my go-to controller when I play the original Xbox. Which brings us then to the Xbox S controller, the small one that they released afterwards because people were complaining the other one was too big. This came with my Xbox when I bought it. I got an Xbox late. My friend had one and that's where I played it for years. So when the Xbox S controller came out, it was bundled with all the consoles, and that's the one I got, so I had to buy a Duke controller separately. Why? Because I really don't like the S controller. They've moved the black and white buttons. Why? I don't know. They're just in a stupid place. I can't get used to them there. The controller doesn't look very nice to me. Kind of looks a bit ugly. I just don't think it feels as good to use. Just not a fan of it at all. I don't think it was an improvement whatsoever, and I just don't understand the complaints with the Duke, to be honest. The Xbox 360 controller. I've had a USB one for years, long before a fan bought me an Xbox 360, because I was using it for PC gaming, and it's a tremendous controller. Takes everything I like about the Duke, and then combines it with the idea of the S of being a smaller, more sleek controller, but actually does it really well, and it's an incredible controller. The triggers, again, top notch. Xbox triggers usually really good. Analog sticks, fantastic. Face button's great. Got the Xbox button in the middle. I don't know if it actually does anything on PC. I think on the Xbox it's like the PlayStation button and the home button on the Nintendo consoles. But yeah, the D-pad is a bit of a letdown, but again, usually when I'm playing games on the PC, the D-pad's just there, maybe as to select an additional item when you're playing, fly going about, so it never really becomes an issue for me. It's an incredibly comfortable controller, buttons, triggers, analog sticks, all top notch. It is an excellent controller, just excellent, really is. So now we move on to Sega controllers. And we have the 3-button controller for the Mega Drive / Genesis. Yeah, it's terrible. It's it's the first F controller. D-pad is really spongy and shitty. It is awful. The people complain about the GameCube controller, that D-pad, and yeah, it's not the best D-pad, but it's miles better than this crap. The 3-button setups, just all in a line, just never felt really comfortable for me for switching between things. I just don't enjoy this controller at all. But they did release a 6-button controller, mainly because certain games like fighting games needed those 6 buttons. But of course we're only getting the 3-button control version with the Mega Drive Mini, despite the fact there are a handful of games that need the 6-button controller. So we have to buy it separate. Japan, get it bundled! Bastards. Anyway, the 6-button controller. What an improvement. It's really good. The D-pad, still not the best D-pad around, but so much improved over the original 3-button controller. The 6 buttons, the 3 buttons that were there originally just work much nicer, feel nicer to press, and despite the fact they're in the same formation, it just seems easier. I don't know if it's because you got the other 3 buttons on top, and I don't know if that's like a mental thing with me. It's almost like, you know, the SNES controller. We got A, B, X, Y above it, but now you've got an additional 2 others, and it just feels much better. The you know, the triggers on the top, not triggers exactly, are they? Just L and R buttons, whatever. They feel a lot better as well. Or is there only one? Is there only one on the Mega Drive controller? I can't remember. Anyway, yeah, it's just completely improved. The design looks nicer, feels better in your hand. All the buttons are just much better to play with. Yeah, so when I got a Mega Drive only a couple of years ago, one of the first things I did was go out and buy a controller for it. And it is a bit of a shame because the controllers are more expensive usually than the console. The console I think I paid £10 for, and the controller cost me £13 all on its own. But yeah, definitely worth it. And oh boy, that brings us to the last controller. For the Dreamcast, my favourite console of all time. One of the reasons I don't like the Dreamcast is its controller. It is utterly garbage. Firstly, the design looks terrible. Really, really just visually unappealing completely. Just doesn't look good. One analog stick, and it's shit. It just isn't very good. D-pad. You want to talk about bad D-pads? This might be the worst D-pad I have ever used. Obviously, all these consoles here, what I'm referencing from, yeah, it is the worst D-pad ever. Face buttons, they're fine. Yay. Then you've got the wire, which does the opposite of every other controller ever, pretty much. The wire comes out at the bottom. Why? It just gets in the way, and it's just really weird. And then you have the slot, you know, for the VMU, the visual memory unit. You can put it in. It's like a memory card. Obviously, it's got a little screen, and I've never found the screen to be useful in any game I've played on the what's it called, the Dream Crap. Yeah. So you've just got this really hulking, bulking, shitty controller, kind of like, you know, the Xbox Duke. All the issues people have with that, I just have with the Dreamcast controller. It's not comfortable. It is large. The buttons are shit. The analog controller is shit. The D-pad is awful. And then if you haven't got a VMU, you've just got that big hole in the top of it, which just looks terrible, and it feels really badly made as well, really cheap and tacky. And then you just got the wire issue, which is like, what the hell were they thinking? Yeah, thankfully, the same people that made the Brawler 64 are doing a Dreamcast controller. And I backed it on Kickstarter, and they should be shipping around August time, so only a month away. And I'm hoping that getting a decent controller for the Dreamcast will get me to play the system a little bit more. Maybe want to collect a few more games for it, because at the moment it's just gathering dust under my bed, literally. Yeah. So those are the game controllers, and that's my tier list. So let me know down below what you think of my tier list and how I've ranked them and how wrong I am with certain controllers. Yeah, I know. And let me know what your tier list would look like if you were to rank these controllers. What would it differ from mine? I can guess on a couple of them, but you know. So I'm bigcal, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.